Zarelek adjusted his translator collar as the lecture hall dimmed. Hundreds of eyes, compound, reflective, multifaceted, turned toward him. The air shimmered with ozone and ion filtration. In the second row sat the one anomaly among the sea of alien faces, a small human girl named Lyra, her posture relaxed, her gaze unreadable. He began. The human species, while intellectually competent, is biologically ill-suited for interstellar integration. Their bodies are fragile. Their emotional regulation is erratic. Their environment, Earth, is one of chaos, predators, unstable climate systems, infectious agents. His voice dripped with clinical detachment. Their continued survival is, frankly, improbable. Some students emitted polite hisses of agreement. Others glanced uneasily at Lyra. She didn't flinch. No eye roll. No rebuttal. She just sat there, hands folded. Zarelek focused on her. Would our human representative care to elaborate on her species' evolutionary trajectory? No, thank you, she replied evenly. The refusal echoed unnaturally in the silence. Zarelek tilted his head, the light catching the glint of his facial ridges. A curious response. One might think a species constantly fighting for survival would be eager to display its methods. I didn't say I couldn't. Just not interested in being your specimen today. A few murmurs rippled through the room. One student, a cephalode with glimmering translucent skin, stiffened. Another, a scaly Altari male, looked anywhere but at Lyra. Zarelek pressed forward, undeterred. I find your unwillingness to participate revealing, he said. Your kind's instinct for territorial dominance often overrides logic. Lyra blinked slowly. You asked? I answered. There was no anger in her tone, only finality. Zarelek stepped down from his elevated dais and moved toward her row, gesturing to the large anatomical holodisplay hovering behind him. The image of a human skeleton rotated beside comparative frames from other species. Observe the inefficient structure. Weak clavicles. Exposed trachea. Limited regenerative capacity. Truly fascinating. She remained motionless. He came closer, gesturing broadly. Perhaps a real-time example. Would you permit me a brief examination of your limb? No. I assure you, it will not be invasive. Merely an external. I said no. Zarelek hesitated. The translator flickered, misinterpreting her tone as disinterest rather than refusal. Assuming miscommunication, he reached out gently, talon-like fingers brushing her forearm to draw attention to the joint. The sound was soft, an organic snap, clean and fast. Zarelek stumbled back, arm hanging limply at his side, a sharp intake of breath cutting the air. Lyra hadn't moved from her seat. I warned you, she said simply. A dozen students recoiled. One dropped a stylus. Another backed against the wall. Zarelek stared at his arm, sensors flickering red beneath his skin. Compound bones, supposedly triple reinforced with polymer threading, had folded like softwood. You, he managed, voice strained. You made contact first. You grabbed my arm. Where I'm from, that's threat behavior. I was conducting a demonstration, he said weakly. She nodded. And I was demonstrating my limits. Med drones descended silently from the ceiling, already scanning and stabilizing his injury. Zarelek looked between her and the medical diagnostics. Force output exceeds 200 newtons, a drone stated. Source, seated subject. No elevated heart rate. She looked down at her hands, then back at him. You really shouldn't touch people without permission. He didn't respond. One brave student asked, hesitantly. You didn't even stand up. How did you do that? Lyra tilted her head slightly. My bones are 8 times denser than yours. My tendons are built for torque. I've been catching falling rocks since I was 6. Your professor approached me with the grip strength of a startled rabbit. That wasn't a fight. That was physics. Silence hung like a thick fog. I didn't come here to hurt anyone, she continued, tone quiet. But don't confuse stillness for weakness. Where I'm from, being calm is how you survive. Being gentle doesn't mean we can't be dangerous. A flicker passed through the room, not fear, but a reframing. A recalibration of what a human actually meant. Not fragile. Not erratic. Something else entirely. Lyra looked at Zarelek's cast being formed by the autogel. You'll heal. Just don't touch anyone without asking next time. The professor nodded faintly, dazed. The lecture resumed, but no one remembered what came next. Zarelek returned to the podium the next day with a brace on his arm, and his pride heavily bandaged. The class was quieter than usual, tension woven into the silence. No one commented on the injury. Lyra sat in the same seat, legs crossed, staring forward with the same unreadable expression. He didn't acknowledge her directly, but there was a hesitation now in his voice. The authority was still there, but the condescension had vanished. We'll continue our comparative anatomy unit, he said, avoiding eye contact. Specifically, the neuromotor pathways that differ between predatory and non-predatory species. This time, no student dared to interrupt. A few glanced at Lyra, curiosity battling caution. 15 minutes in, Zarelek paused, rubbed his uninjured hand over his cranial ridge, then turned to her. Lyra, would you care to elaborate on your species' fight-or-flight mechanisms? She glanced at him. You sure you want me to? The room held its breath. Yes, he said carefully. She stood without urgency. A subtle shift, but the room tensed. Even standing still, she carried weight in the air. Not aggression, density. Presence. She walked slowly to the front, posture casual, but every movement precise. Our brains don't just prepare for danger, she began. They plan for it. We're not unique for having fear responses. We're unique because we calculate threat levels constantly, subconsciously, and assign values. She pointed to the display showing a diagram of a typical bipedal nervous system. That's a Venari's reaction time, 0.6 seconds under stress. Now here's a human. She tapped again. The response time dropped almost in half. It's not just speed, she said. It's prediction. Anticipation. We've had to guess what kind of threat is coming for millions of years. Guess wrong, you die. Guess right, you live long enough to teach someone else. Zarelek asked, with a touch more respect this time. You responded to my contact with force. Was that anticipation? No, she replied. That was instinct. A touch from behind, unexpected, while being cornered? It's not a conscious choice. It's a trained reflex. He nodded once. You applied enough torque to fracture my radius without leverage or stance. She looked directly at him. I wasn't trying to harm you. That was my minimum reaction. That was restraint. A ripple of unease moved through the students. Another student, a slender Corellian, raised a trembling hand. But how do you control that kind of power all the time? Isn't it exhausting? Lyra considered the question. Sometimes. That's why we build systems, laws, etiquette, culture. If we didn't learn to contain our own strength, we wouldn't be here. We'd tear each other apart. The Corellian blinked slowly. Is that why your species is so aggressive? We're not aggressive by default, Lyra said. We're responsive. The difference is context. Zarelek took a step closer, slower than usual. What if someone less disciplined than you were here? Another human, one without your restraint? Then you'd be lucky I was the one sitting in that chair yesterday, she said. Several students stiffened. Zarelek exhaled slowly. The implication being that humanity isn't merely dangerous, but also protective. Lyra shrugged. We protect what matters to us. Sometimes that's people. Sometimes it's an idea. Survival sharpens loyalty. A silence followed, heavier than the one before. There was no bravado in her tone. No posturing. Just fact. Another alien, a Rithan female with 3 sets of eyes, raised a tentacle slowly. Is Earth truly that hostile? Enough to force this level of adaptation? It's not just hostile, Lyra said. It's indifferent. You can't argue with gravity, or venom, or starvation. You either adapt, or you're replaced. Zarelek studied her a moment longer. You never raised your voice. Never postured. Yet you delivered more impact than I've seen in decades of instruction. That's the other part of being human, Lyra said, turning back toward her seat. We learned long ago that shouting doesn't make you dangerous. But being silent, and still willing to act, that's a language every species understands. No one interrupted her as she sat. This time, even the room itself seemed quieter. The med drones had barely finished sealing Zarelek's bone when the questions started. None came from him. They came from the students. Hesitant at first, then faster, overlapping. How dense are your bones exactly? What else can you survive? Is it true your planet has liquid fire that falls from the sky? Why do you look so calm all the time if everything is trying to kill you? Lyra answered without embellishment. Human bone density averages around 1.9 grams per cubic centimeter. Denser than most known sapients. Muscle structure is layered, with fast twitch fibers prioritized. Built for endurance and impact recovery. She pointed to the hollow again, now replaced with a terrain map. Earth has a variable gravity field, just under 10 meters per second squared. That's twice what the average species here is used to. Add in tectonic instability, seasonal climate swings, and biological threats in every biome, and you don't get peace. You get adaptation or extinction. The Rithan student from earlier leaned forward. How do your young survive? They don't always. But the ones who do get strong. Coordination starts early. Pain tolerance isn't a lesson, it's a byproduct of living. Broken bones, lacerations, fevers, normal milestones. Another hand raised. But you have technology now. Shouldn't Earth be safer? Lyra shook her head. Safer doesn't mean safe. Nature doesn't care about progress. Hurricanes still happen. Animals still kill. You don't negotiate with physics or instinct. Zarelek, quieter than usual, finally spoke. And emotionally? With so much stress, how does your species handle trauma? Sometimes we don't. But we talk about it. We write it down. We tell stories. We learn to carry it. Humans don't forget pain, we use it. It becomes instruction. Warning. Purpose. One of the smaller students, a Levanian with shimmering blue skin, whispered, You're a Deathworlder. That means Earth is officially classified as Level 6 hazard. Level 8, Lyra corrected. The charts are outdated. We've cataloged over 30 apex predators with documented kills on armed adult humans. That's not counting microbes or weather systems. The student recoiled. And you live there voluntarily? We call it home. And we built civilization in spite of it. Zarelek leaned forward slightly. You said humans suppress their instincts. How? With what mechanisms? Social conditioning. Laws. Expectations. But also choice. Knowing what we could do doesn't mean we want to. Most of us choose not to act on it. That restraint is deliberate. Another voice chimed in. You could kill most of us without effort. Lyra met the gaze directly. Yes. But you don't. No. Why? Because there's no value in being feared for the wrong reasons. Silence. Again. Not from uncertainty this time, but understanding. Not one of them doubted she could back up her words. But none felt threatened. That paradox sat heavy. A Sarek student, reptilian and skeptical, asked, Then why come here? If your kind is already so advanced in survival, what do you need from us? Perspective, Lyra said. Earth made us strong, but not peaceful. You've learned peace. Harmony. Things we're still struggling to master. That's why I'm here. Not to show off, just to learn. Zarelek studied her a long moment. In all my years, I've never seen a species develop this level of aggression without collapse. We almost did. More than once. But we adapt emotionally, too. Compassion became a survival trait. Empathy. The ability to see yourself in others. That's how we stabilized. A pause, thoughtful. Zarelek inclined his head. And what do you fear? Not much, she replied. But apathy is dangerous. So is arrogance. The assumption that strength excuses behavior. Or that peace is a given. We know better. No one laughed. No one moved. Someone finally whispered, "You're not what we expected." Lyra answered without looking at anyone directly. "That's why you need to hear it from us. Otherwise, all you see is the aftermath." By the third day, the atmosphere in the lecture hall had shifted. Not from fear, something else. A cautious respect. Every student sat straighter. Questions were more thoughtful. Zarelek entered with a different energy, subdued but sharper, like someone who had accepted that their framework had been inadequate and now aimed to rebuild it. Today's topic was cultural convergence. Zarelek opened with a measured tone. Understanding the psychological impact of origin environments is critical to diplomacy and integration. Let us examine how environment shapes ideology. He paused, then gestured toward Lyra. Would you provide your perspective? She didn't hesitate. Humans are raised with contradiction. We're taught cooperation in a world that punishes it. We value trust in systems that sometimes fail. And we're told to be kind while preparing for violence. That contrast shapes our worldview. A student asked. But how do you balance that conflict? Doesn't it cause instability? It does, she said. That's why human societies struggle. We're constantly navigating extremes. Individualism versus community. Emotion versus reason. Strength versus vulnerability. There's no final answer. Just a moving target. Zarelek interjected. In your history, has balance ever been achieved? Only temporarily. Our peace is usually reactive, post-conflict. It's something we rebuild, not maintain. Stability, for us, is fragile. We know that. That's why it's valuable. A Sarek student narrowed their gaze. So you thrive in chaos? We endure chaos, Lyra corrected. Thriving implies control. What we've learned is how to find function inside dysfunction. Our greatest strengths evolved from necessity, not design. Another voice chimed in. If your culture is forged in hardship, what keeps your people from turning against each other permanently? Shared struggle. When survival is on the line, division kills. Empathy becomes essential. You don't need to love someone to protect them, you just need to know their loss would make the group weaker. That's how tribes became nations. Zarelek nodded. So your social fabric is utilitarian? In the beginning, yes. But over time, utility became morality. Protecting the weak became an ethical standard, not just a survival tactic. That's how compassion evolved. The room went still. One of the cephalids, known for emotionless logic, asked, Are emotions reliable tools for decision-making? They're not tools, Lyra said. They're sensors. Like pain or temperature. Ignoring them leads to failure. Over-relying on them leads to chaos. The point is to interpret, not obey. Another student asked quietly, What role does fear play in your society? Fear drives innovation. You don't build vaccines without disease. You don't fortify homes without storms. Fear tells us where the danger is. The challenge is not letting it decide everything else. Zarelek looked at her thoughtfully. Your people fear extinction. Yes. That's what drives everything: progress, preservation, exploration. We don't assume safety. We manufacture it. A long silence followed. Then a Levanian spoke, almost unsure. You make it sound like hope isn't natural to humans. Hope isn't natural, Lyra replied. It's deliberate. Manufactured in the same way we build shelter. It takes effort. We create hope because the world doesn't offer it freely. A ripple moved through the class, something bordering on awe, but restrained. A tall Altari finally said, If your species is this accustomed to survival, why reach out to the stars? Why leave your world at all? Because survival without meaning isn't enough. We've mastered endurance. Now we want to understand purpose. That's what space represents for us, context beyond struggle. Zarelek folded his arms, expression unreadable. So you came here not to conquer, not to compete, but to learn. To coexist, she said. Power without perspective is just destruction. That's not why we left Earth. Another pause, not of skepticism, but of recalibration. The students weren't just seeing a human. They were beginning to see what humanity represented, a species born from adversity, tempered by contradiction, but seeking something more than dominance. Zarelek looked down at his mended arm, then back to her. And what happens if the galaxy decides it fears you? Lyra's voice was calm. Then we'll show it the other side of what survival taught us: mercy, cooperation, and loyalty. Fear might get attention, but trust builds civilizations. No one had anything left to say. Zarelek dismissed the class earlier than usual that day. The room emptied slowly, students lingering, watching Lyra as though they were still trying to solve a puzzle with no clear edges. No one had spoken to her directly yet. Not out of fear anymore, but caution, like approaching a flame they didn't want to smother or provoke. She remained silent, unmoved by the attention. Outside the lecture hall, she was intercepted by a trio of advanced xenopsychology students. One of them, a pale-skinned Kalari, looked at her with clinical focus. We've been reviewing your encounter with Professor Zarelek. The incident data shows no spike in adrenaline, no aggressive behavioral indicators. Is that normal for your kind? For some, Lyra answered. Control is taught early. Reactivity gets people hurt. We adapt fast, but adaptation isn't always visible. The second, a bronze-plated Triveran, asked, would it have made a difference if you were standing? Or if he had persisted? If I had stood, it would have escalated. If he'd continued, I would have ended it. Simple mechanics. He stopped before it became a problem. The third, softer in tone, hesitated. Do you think most humans would have done the same? No, she said. Some would have frozen. Others would have overreacted. We're not uniform. That's why we build systems to hold our worst instincts in check. They nodded slowly. Not satisfied, but informed. Later, in a faculty review session, Zarelek found himself surrounded by colleagues from various disciplines: anthropologists, biophysicists, diplomats. The topic was no longer hypothetical. Humans were a confirmed anomaly. One of the older scholars, a Yethian with data lines scrolling across her translucent skin, stated flatly, her restraint was more terrifying than if she had retaliated violently. That kind of discipline paired with that kind of capacity suggests cultural design, not accident. Zarelek disagreed. It's not design. It's inheritance. Their world bred both danger and responsibility. That balance wasn't chosen. It was demanded. A soft click of approval sounded from a Rithan elder. Then they are dangerous. They are aware of their danger, Zarelek countered. And they choose to contain it. That matters more. Another whispered. What happens when containment fails? Zarelek paused. That's why we must understand them before we judge them. Elsewhere, among the students, the tone shifted. Whispers turned to conversations. Questions became invitations. Lyra began to be approached more openly, sometimes by the curious, sometimes by the bold. One asked her directly, what does your species want from the rest of us? Understanding, she said. Not permission. Not pity. Just perspective. We're not asking anyone to excuse what we are. We want others to know why we are. The student pressed. What if some species decide humans are too unstable to trust? Then they'll have to decide whether to isolate us or try to understand us. Both carry consequences. Another student, trying to hide his nerves, asked, do you enjoy being feared? No, she replied. But being underestimated is worse. Fear fades with knowledge. Underestimation breeds mistakes. Word spread faster than official reports. Recordings of the incident were reviewed across departments. Debates flared in academic channels. Some advocated caution, citing human volatility. Others argued for accelerated diplomacy, citing the evidence of self-regulation. The diplomatic wing submitted a preliminary dossier. It summarized Lyra's actions in one line. Response calibrated, proportionate, and under full cognitive control. What followed was an invitation. Not to debate. Not to interrogate. But to present. Lyra was offered the floor at the next interspecies ethics symposium. She accepted with no theatrics. Her address was short. She spoke of Earth, of fragility and power existing simultaneously. She explained how strength without wisdom was as useless as peace without defense. She didn't argue for superiority, only recognition. When she finished, there was no applause, only silence. The kind that precedes serious thought. A weight had shifted. Later, in the records of the Academy, her speech would be archived under a new classification: high risk, high stability sapient case study. The galaxy had encountered humans before. But this was the first time it understood why they'd survived. And more importantly, why they were still trying to be better.